Welcome back to another episode of Don't Drink That. I'm so excited, man. So let's get into it. Before ancient Egypt built the pyramids, before Babylon wrote its famous laws, before the stories that eventually became the Bible, there was ancient Sumer. Around 4500 BCE in southern Mesopotamia or modern day Iraq, a civilization appeared that many historians consider the first true civilization in human history. The people of Sumer created things that changed the course of humanity forever. They invented things such as writing, organized cities, recorded law, mathematics, and astronomy. In many ways, the modern world begins with Sumer. But hidden inside the thousands of clay tablets they left behind are stories that sparked one of the most famous conspiracy theories of the modern era. Stories about powerful beings known as the Anunnaki, beings described as coming from the heavens, beings who shaped humanity, and beings who some people today believe were not gods at all, but visitors from somewhere else. So today we're going to separate history from speculation. We'll look at the real discoveries surrounding ancient Sumer, the original texts that mention the Anunnaki, and how those ancient myths eventually transformed into one of the biggest conspiracy theories on the internet. Because sometimes the real mystery isn't the ancient story itself, it's how those stories evolved thousands of years later. All right, now let's talk about the discovery of ancient Sumer for a minute, everybody. So, for most of human history, the civilization of Sumer was completely forgotten. Its cities were buried beneath layers of desert sand. Its language had vanished, and its stories were lost to time. That changed during the 19th century when European archaeologists began excavating ruins across Mesopotamia. Explorers such as Austin Henry Layard uncovered massive ancient cities like Nineveh. Soon after, scholars discovered something extraordinary. Thousands of clay tablets covered in strange wedge-shaped symbols. This writing system became known as cuneiform, but no one could read it. That changed when scholars like Henry Rawlinson finally deciphered the script. Suddenly, the voices of one of the oldest civilizations on Earth came back to life. By the early 1900s, archaeologists had translated thousands of texts. Among them were some of the oldest recorded stories ever discovered, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, the Eridu Genesis, and the Sumerian King List. The historian Samuel Noah Kramer famously summarized the importance of these discoveries with one sentence: history begins at Sumer. And with history became mythology because many of these texts describe a world filled with gods, cosmic forces, and mysterious beings called the Anunnaki. So there are some strange records of the human kings list. The records are just weird. One of the most fascinating ancient documents became discovered in Mesopotamia. At first glance, it seemed like a simple historical record. It lists the kings who ruled the cities of Sumer. But when researchers looked closer, something strange appeared. The earliest kings were said to rule for tens of thousands of years. Like, for example, Elulim ruled 28,800 years. Alagar ruled 3,600 years. Several rulers are described as having reigns lasting thousands of years. Then something dramatic happens in the text. A great flood occurs. And after the flood, the reigns of kings suddenly become much shorter, closer to normal human lifespans. Mainstream historians generally interpret this as symbolic numerology. The Sumerians used a base 60 number system, and extremely large numbers often carried religious meaning rather than literal historical value. But this unusual detail has fueled speculation for decades. Some conspiracy researchers believe the pre-flood rulers were not normal humans. They argue the texts might be describing advanced ancient rulers, non-human beings, or altered human lifespans. Now, there is no biological evidence supporting extreme lifespans like those described in the text, but the numbers remain one of the strangest features of Sumerian record. and they are not one of the and they are one of the reasons the king list continues to fascinate historians on conspiracy theorists alike. So, who were the Anunnaki really? In the original Sumerian text, the word Anunnaki roughly translates to spring of offspring of Anu. Anu was the sky god in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The Anunnaki were considered powerful divine beings who govern different aspects of the universe. They appear in several ancient works, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, various temple hymns, and mythological texts. So, in these stories, the Anunnaki play an important role in shaping the world. They establish order in the cosmos, they interact with humanity, they decide human fate, and they participate in the story of the Great Flood. Modern scholars who study ancient Mesopotamia languages generally interpret these figures as mythological deities, similar to the gods in Greek or Egyptian mythology. But some details in the text really stand out. The gods are often described as descending from heavens. They bring knowledge, they create humans, and those descriptions have inspired a completely different interpretation, one that would eventually evolve into the ancient astronaut theory. One of the most interesting Sumerian stories about the origin of humanity appears in the Atrahasis epic. In this story, the gods originally perform all the labor required to maintain the world, but eventually the lower gods, known as the Igigi, grow tired of working. They rebel. The higher gods respond by creating new species to take over the work, human beings. According to the story, humanity is formed from clay mixed with the essence of a sacrificed god. In mainstream scholarship, the narrative is interpreted symbolically. It reflects ancient ideas about humanity's relationship with the divine and the structure of society. But this passage is where many modern conspiracy theories begin. Some ancient astronaut theories claim the story may be describing genetic engineering in symbolic form. They argue that divine essence could represent advanced biological manipulation. However, linguistics who study the original Sumerian and Akkadian texts say there is no direct language suggesting laboratory-style DNA experimentations, but still, the idea that humans were created by powerful beings from the heavens is powerful enough to fuel speculation because it's not any different than what people believe in the Bible or in the Quran or in any other form of religion. Like, all those stories sound way out there anyway. So why would this be that much further off? It's equally as silly or equally as weighted as any of these other religions. So, I digress. Take that for what you will. But another major theme in Sumerian literature is the story of a catastrophic flood. This flood appears in several ancient texts, including the Eridu Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Atrahasis. So in these stories, a man named Atrahasis, or Utnapishtim, in the Gilgamesh version, survives the disaster by building a massive boat. For many readers, the similarities to the story of Noah's Ark are impossible to ignore. What makes the Sumerian version particularly interesting is that it appears centuries before the biblical account. Geologists believe large floods did occur in ancient Mesopotamia. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically, and river systems frequently overflowed, right? But some alternative theories suggest something much bigger, a global catastrophe, a lost advanced civilization, a reset of human history. There is currently no confirmed evidence of a technologically advanced global civilization before Sumer, but the flood myth continues to be one of the most debated connections between ancient texts and modern speculation. So now you have your Anunnaki conspiracy theory. So the modern Anunnaki conspiracy theory largely began in 1976 with the publication of a book called The 12th Planet by Zechariah Sitchin. So Sitchin proposed a radical reinterpretation of the ancient Sumerian tablets. He claimed the Anunnaki were not mythological gods. Instead, he argued they were extraterrestrial visitors from a planet called Nibiru. Now, this is where it breaks down for me a little bit. So if you know anything about etymology, then you know the word terra means earth. So extraterrestrial to me sounds like extra earth beings. So to say that they come from the planet Nibiru kind of breaks it for me, because if they're extra beings of earth, then they couldn't have come from Nibiru unless they moved to Nibiru and then came back to planet Earth. That's just me, but let's keep this train rolling. So according to his theory, the Anunnaki arrived on Earth thousands of years ago. They genetically engineered humans to work as laborers, and they established early human civilizations. These ideas became incredibly popular in documentaries, books, and television shows about ancient aliens. However, many Assyriologist scholars who specialize in ancient Mesopotamian languages strongly disagree with Sitchin's interpretations. Researchers such as Dr. Michael Heiser, who held a PhD in Semitic languages, argued that Sitchin's translations were not supported by original texts. In other words, the extraterrestrial interpretation appears to be a modern reinterpretation, not something clearly stated in the tablets themselves. So, it is possible that Sitchin was on the right track and misinterpreted it with the extraterrestrial part. Like, it's possible that they came from Nibiru, but they're not extraterrestrials. They're just beings from another planet. So that's highly possible, and a lot of people don't know a lot about etymology, so they're not going to know what extraterrestrial actually means. But the Nibiru theory itself it often connects to the idea of a hidden planet. So the Anunnaki conspiracy, in Sitchin's interpretation, Nibiru follows a massive orbit that brings it into the inner solar system every 3,600 years. But in ancient Sumerian astronomy, the word Nibiru likely referred to a celestial crossing point, or possibly the planet Jupiter. Modern astronomers have found no evidence of a rogue planet entering the solar system on such a regular orbit. If an object that large existed, it would dramatically disrupt the gravitational stability of known planets. Still, the idea of Nibiru continues to circulate in conspiracy culture because it connects cosmic mystery with ancient authority. But also, I don't believe a word that, like, NASA says, just because if you know anything about conspiracies, then you've heard a lot about NASA. But again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not here to sway anybody's thoughts. I'm just putting it all out there, and this is all for, entertainment purposes anyway, so do your own research. But what do we actually know about ancient Sumer? Here's what historians agree on. Sumer was the first known civilization. The Anunnaki are authentic figures in ancient Mesopotamian mythology. Flood stories appear in texts older than the Bible, and humanity is described as being created from clay and divine essence. But there is currently no verified evidence for extraterrestrial DNA manipulation, alien mining expeditions, or hidden Anunnaki bloodlines controlling modern society. The Anunnaki conspiracy was discovered in the ancient tablets. If it was created through modern reinterpretation of ancient myths, but maybe that's part of the reason these stories continue to fascinate us, because even after thousands of years, ancient Sumer still holds mysteries. And sometimes the most powerful mysteries are the ones that sit somewhere between history and imagination. But also, we live in the age of truth right now. And a lot of conspiracies have come to light not as conspiracy. or not as a theory at least. So, with that being said, I'm going to head out of here, guys. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Again, I'm trying to get monetized so that way I can make cool merch for this Don't Drink That hoodie for you guys. And I cannot wait until that happens because I've got so many ideas for merch and different giveaways and things like that. So once it happens, I'm going to start going in. But thank you again for joining me. I love you guys. Stay safe. Remember, don't drink that. And I can't wait to deliver part 2 because we're going to dive into more to Zechariah Ascension, the Nibiru and Anunnaki conspiracies in depth. And then from that, we're going to move on to ancient Egypt. So thank you so much for stopping by. Everybody take it easy. Peace.